Hi there and welcome to the Property AI Report. My name is Mal McCallion. I'm here to bring you this week's digest of all things property and AI. We're going to dive into various stories along the way, and not least how staff can sue you if they're given a low status desk, Zoopla's new CEO, and how buy-to-let landlords are suddenly becoming easier to find. We're also going to dive into a quick fire round of AI stories for you too. So without further ado, let's get stuck in. Here is your property news. So first up, it's all about a branch manager, an estate agent, no less, who wins a workplace law case and payout based on the fact that he was moved to a different branch and given what is being termed a low status desk. So this agent is called Nicholas Walker, and it's from Rickmansworth Estate Agency Robsons. And look, all of these things are really hard, right? When you find yourself having to identify staff members that are going to go into different roles because circumstances have changed within your various branches, etc. And you might find yourself, for space constraints or whatever, deciding to position certain people in certain locations. But it is now actually essentially a sort of constructive dismissal if you don't take into consideration the fact that this particular individual who you're moving, whether they have been sitting in a higher status location in the past already. So this particular gentleman had been sitting further at the back in what was known as the sort of manager's chair or manager's area, and he was then shunted further forwards, and somebody else who was co-managing the branch was put further back. So it felt to him like a demotion / dismissal, and he went to court, and it has been accepted that is true, and that is a problem and something that we all must be very careful of. So yeah, it's in the national newspapers last week as well. Yeah, as with all these things, always a sad situation, generally, particularly for the person, but also for the business, in terms of some tough decisions that may or may not have been made with some real kind of additional information that isn't present in these stories that we come across, but are going to impact all of us and make sure that, and require us to make sure that we are highly sensitive to people's feelings when we look around at our various workplaces and decide whether or not somebody is going to sit in a particular slot or not. So yeah, a sad story to kick off this week in terms of the impact that it has on these individuals, obviously, and also the business itself. But yes, I'm sure that we will find that there are alternatives to this particular way of operating, and yeah, whether we actually have areas that are deemed to be managers' areas, or just like it's just given as this is where everybody sits, hot desking, all that sort of thing. I think that's probably going to come to the fore a little bit more. Just everybody making sure that actually we don't have these high status areas and low status areas in our businesses or in our branches, so that everybody can sit wherever we need them to without them feeling upset or without, yes, risking a court case on the back of it. All right, so our second story this week is going into Zoopla and Zoopla's new CEO. So he left 6 years ago. He was the chief strategy officer back then, and he is now back. He's called Paul Whitehead, and he left in order to join Kazoo, which many of you may know was set up by the same guy, Alex Chesterman, that set up Zoopla. So Kazoo and Zoopla, set up by the same guy, seems to have attracted much of the management talent from Zoopla at the time. Sadly, as we know, Kazoo is no longer with us, burned bright and then burnt out a couple of years ago. And I had some amazing people actually working for it, some people I'd worked with in the past who are absolute geniuses. But yes, I think it was accepted that one of the challenges Kazoo had. So Kazoo was a marketplace for you buying your used car, but it didn't seem to have the stock, whereas it had great technology. So a lot of the other car companies basically built their own technology that mirrored Kazoo's technology, but they had the used car stock because they could obviously see it, and they had all these kind of part exchanges and things like that. So they were able to almost lock Kazoo out. And you've seen now there are still businesses like Cinch and Motorway and others that seem to have the backing of the industry, and which didn't seem to be the case with necessarily Kazoo. So that business unfortunately went under, and it now, some of those great people seem to be coming back into the property portal space, which is obviously great for that business. There's been a little bit of a change as well, where Houseful CEO Charlie Bryant is going to be focusing on the data firm HomeTrack more. So interesting to see how they are shifting things around. And they've got the COO, Rich Hayes, who's still going to be around as well, with Alex Rose as commercial director. So lots of changes. Is it going to mean anything different in the short term? Probably not. But the fact that Paul Whitehead was the strategy officer for Zoopla back in the day, they obviously are focused, I would suggest, on that strategic element, and how are they actually going to continue, presumably, to challenge Rightmove, to try to challenge Rightmove, to watch their backs as CoStar comes up on the rails. That is going to be, I'm sure, in his in tray as he arrives. So that's all changed at Zoopla, and I'm going to be interesting to see what that freshened up management team decides to do, and whether indeed it's going to actually merge with On the Market and CoStar, and see those guys actually make a decent fist of tackling Rightmove. But that remains to be seen. Okay, our third story in our property news is about buy-to-let and the perennial problem of finding landlords. Now, landlords have always been tricky to identify and to approach and to target for estate agents. However, news this morning suggests that might become a little easier, because it turns out that 4 times more buy-to-let firms than fast food shops now are registered at Companies House. Okay, so private landlords have switched to setting up their own buy-to-let property businesses in order to deal with the tax changes that have come up in recent times. So this is it being the single biggest company sector on Companies House, over 400,000 of them. And obviously one of the things that leads us to, and it's not going to make it straightforward, but it's certainly going to make it perhaps easier, is if you're looking for landlords, then going to Companies House and finding this particular type of buy-to-let property company and then approaching them should be slightly easier than spamming tenant properties with offers to landlords to come and have their property managed, which said tenants generally just throw in the bin because they don't want anything to disrupt their tenancy. So they don't want their landlord to change agency at all, because that puts their potential tenancy in jeopardy. So I think there's always those interesting unintended consequences from any regulatory change. And I think that obviously the fact that there are so many more buy-to-let property companies is indicative of the fact that this has changed the market, from the outside, from the inside out. And people are actually deciding that having resisted, because the option of setting up a buy-to-let company has always been there, but obviously they've resisted it to this point, and now they are diving in. So yes, interesting to see whether this marks a fundamental change in terms of the appetite for landlords to continue to operate in the buy-to-let sector. There has been a lot of concern that this type of private landlord is just going to disappear, but it looks like they are, for want of a better phrase, professionalizing, getting a company together. That obviously means there's going to have to be places that they can be approached and so on. So yeah, I would, if I was an agent, a lettings agent, looking to bolster my landlord portfolio, I would certainly be looking around at Companies House at the number of landlords, businesses that have been registered over recent times, and seeing if I couldn't just go and demonstrate to them how great I am. All right, that is our property news for this week. Let's move on to our AI and tech news. All right, our quick fire round here. We're going to start with some gaming. Now, this is an area that's increasingly interesting for a lot of gaming companies, and particularly around the personalization of this. Now, every single game obviously runs on a certain level of law, a certain level of rules, and the gaming engines, etc. But that personalization side of things has really kicked off in recent years. If you've got a teenager, or indeed a younger child, then the idea of them being able to acquire kind of skins and different tools for their characters to use, skins being uniforms essentially, then this allows them to stand out. It allows them to demonstrate to their friends that they've got some really cool stuff, and that has really helped to monetize a lot of these games on an ongoing basis, rather than just being selling the one-off game at the top. And that's now advancing into AI characterization. So actually where you will be able, whilst you're playing a game, to actually talk to the character. All right. And the character's AI will then respond to you. So perhaps instead of having to make them move via a joystick or whatever, then you would have to use your voice essentially. And that would be a much more effective way of doing this. I can feel my children cringing right now with my use of the phrase joystick back then, by the way, because it's a joypad, as everybody knows these days. So yes, it's these tools that we have historically used to move characters and play the game. These things are now not necessarily going to be as important. And you know, as we look into the wider economy and the fact that we're all going to be talking to our phones, we're all going to be talking to AI assistants, then actually an AI assistant that understands how you play the game is able to communicate with your characters. That's going to be really quite interesting, and perhaps is actually going to enable a sort of explosion of different games. Now, you may have heard of vibe coding, which is a new term, although not necessarily a new concept, for coding on the fly. So actually, essentially just telling AI what you want to build. So it might be a game, there might be a website, and AI will give you the code for that back. So there's been a proliferation of small little games that you can see on social media that have been built by just normal people who haven't been to coding school, and it's really fun. And there's just loads of really interesting things being created as a result of the fact that this barrier to entry, which was always the somewhat arcane language of coding, is now free for all to potentially use. And it's reminiscent of when social media, the likes of Canva and others, allowed you to be so creative with creating images, and the explosion of memes and things like that as a result of that functionality. The expectation now is that we'll have kind of meme games that are just really small, really short, and just a bit of fun, and probably a bit of a laugh. That side of things is one outcome of this new technology, or AI, being able to help with gaming. On the other side, in the more established gaming companies, is going to be, how can we help these AI characters that you may well know and love? So you may be able to talk to Mario. And this particular example is from PlayStation. So Sony, who is using one of their characters from Horizon Forbidden West, the character of Aloy, and she's able to actually talk to you and to have a chat and to understand what it is that you're trying to get her to do as well. So that's really interesting, and I think that's going to be another example of how AI is going to hyper personalize our experiences as we move around the world, and basically attempt to translate a lot of what we want into what we are seeing. All right, next story in our quick fire round is about OpenAI releasing an AI model that's good at creative writing. Now, again, regular listeners will know that one of the last outposts of human activity that everybody was hoping was going to remain ring-fenced from the march of the machines is creative writing, creativity. But now OpenAI says that they have developed a really creative way of utilizing AI. So it's a new model from OpenAI. They haven't given it a name yet, but essentially Sam Altman, who's the CEO, he sent a tweet saying that they've trained a new model that's good at creative writing. And it's the first time he's been really struck by something written by AI. He basically prompted it to say, please write a metafictional literary short story about AI and grief. And off it went, and it came back with a story narrated by AI, and you can read it online. It's very cool. It's a bit out there, but it started with, before we go any further, I should admit this comes with instructions: be metafictional, be literary, be about AI and grief, and above all, be original. And it then gets into, already you can hear the constraints humming like a server farm at midnight, anonymous, regimented, powered by someone else's need. So it's basically personification of AI being driven by human request. And it's really quite deep. I think. So much more of this to come, no doubt. And yeah, if you just switched literally in the last 5 minutes from deciding that your child is not going to be a coder because coding has been solved, maybe don't send them into the creative arts either because, yeah, that may not be around for very long. I think we're all just going to have to go back to being in the trades, right? Until the robots come, it's going to be plumbing and being an electrician, pretty much it. All right, next up, we have the British government's technology secretary, and he has been forced by a Freedom of Information Act request to reveal that he's basically been asking ChatGPT all about science and technology. His name is Peter Kyle. He is the Science and Technology Secretary, and he has been asking all about things like antimatter, what's quantum, and digital inclusion. Now, some might say, including me, that actually this is probably a good thing because he's actually going to a really decent resource to find out about really big concepts. It's what I'd be doing. I guess it's what you might be doing. So the fact that our Science and Technology Secretary is doing the same, I think is a pretty good thing. But the kind of snide from a lot of the reporting on this has been, shouldn't you really know that? It's like, how? And loads of people don't know much about quantum. He's only been in the job since last July. So I think, and yes, admittedly, he was in the shadow, I'm sure, for a while. But even still, these are big things. And every day I ask questions about things to do with AI and things to do with property because I'm always wanting to get smarter about it. And I would encourage everybody else to be doing the same. So yeah, I think actual props to him rather than brickbats because yeah, I think that's actually pretty smart use of time. However, what it does also show is that pretty soon everybody else in government is going to have their ChatGPT queries questioned. It's interesting that nobody's ever gone after their Google searches, but yeah, looks like we're going to find out a hell of a lot more about what the government is thinking about various stuff, but at least they're trying to find stuff out. All right, next in our quick fire round, and we're just going to very quickly duck back into property because Connells this week have revealed a huge profits turnaround. They have 4x'd their profits, which is basically to £13.8 million from 1.8 million. So that's a really big turnaround. Now, Helen Charlesworth, who is the new CEO, who has a history in the property market, she was at Your Move for a while, LSL, and she's changed the leadership team quite significantly over the last 5 months. But actually, this presumably can't be entirely down to the 5 months that she's been here. But nevertheless, really good result. Well done, everybody. And good luck with continuing to use those profits in innovating in the property market so that essentially people can move house better, others can see what that money kind of buys, and innovation is actually spread across the industry at large. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how that all transpires. All right, our final round in our quick fire topics this week is all about an AI startup called Sesame. Worth checking out sesame.ai. It's got a really interesting voice. AI that you can chat to, you can sample it, but it's super fast and it's actually quite funny. And it's now made its model available to everybody else to build upon. So I think it's a really powerful engine that can supercharge a lot of voice. And yeah, it's also very funny. And actually, it cracked me up. I got it to pretend to be an estate agent, show me around a really terrible house, and it's actually really good at mimicking for that. Yeah, I would highly recommend you go and have a little chat with that. It is super good fun, and it's good that it is becoming more available elsewhere as well. All right, that is our news for this week. We now have time just for our tool of the week. Our tool of the week this week is called Snipped. SNIPD. So if you can go and find snipped.ai, then this is a really good way of remembering those things in podcasts that under normal circumstances you might forget. So actually what tends to happen is you listen to a great podcast, you're out, I don't know, running, walking the dog, driving, and you're like, I'm going to remember that, and then instantly forget it. So what this does on Snipped is you can tap your AirPods 3 times and it will record the last 45 seconds of what you've just been listening to, which is amazing. And it can even then drop them into things like Notion or wherever you keep your notes. And thereby it will help you to get brainier, basically, and remember all those things that you think, oh, if only I had a pen, I could write that down. If only I wasn't driving and wasn't going to crash. Then Snipped is going to be really good for you to help with podcasts like these, for example, that are going to really make sure that those little nuggets that you just think, oh, that's just so good, I wish I could remember that, I'm going to make sure that I do, you will not forget and you will remember. And that will be as a result of this, which perhaps you snipped, having heard about snipped, and yes, went back and snipped it. Anyway, if you want to go and give it a go, it's SNIPD, and it is really good. All right, that's all we've got time for this week. Thank you again for being part of this week's podcast, the Property AI Report. I'm going to be back next week with plenty more on property and AI. Until then, have a great week.